2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel Carter believed he had everything a man could dream of: success, love, and a future that seemed as bright as the morning sun. He had built his life from scratch, working long nights and pouring his energy into a small architecture firm that was now beginning to attract national attention. His designs weren't just buildings. They were living structures meant to give people dignity and comfort. And now, standing in the quiet room of the church with the murmur of guests echoing beyond the wooden doors, Daniel thought he was about to seal not just a marriage, but a story of triumph. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, telling himself the tremor in his hands was only nerves. Weddings were meant to be emotional. After all, outside, the old bell tower of St. Andrews was preparing to ring, and the pews were already filled with friends, family, and reporters eager to witness the union of Daniel Carter and Emily Harrison. To the world, it looked like a perfect pairing: the visionary architect and the elegant woman from a family name that carried decades of influence. Cameras flashed, voices laughed, and anticipation filled the air. But perfection has a way of cracking at the edges before anyone else notices. Through the thin wall, Daniel heard a sound that was at once familiar and strangely unsettling: Emily's laugh. It was the same laugh that had first caught his attention the night they met at a charity gala. That laugh had once been warm, like a melody he could never forget. But now, there was a sharpness in it, a tone that chilled him instead of comforting him. The door to his waiting room was slightly ajar, and curiosity nudged him closer. He froze before it, telling himself he shouldn't listen, that it was wrong. Yet something in his gut insisted, and when instinct speaks, it's rarely without reason. "Are you sure he won't notice?" whispered a voice Daniel recognized as Emily's maid of honor, Claire. Emily's voice followed, steady and confident, carrying none of the tremble Daniel had heard when she rehearsed her vows. "Of course, Daniel sees me as his everything. Once the ceremony is over, he'll hand over control without hesitation. After that, the future is ours to shape." Daniel's chest tightened. At first, he told himself he was mishearing, that maybe she was joking. But her next words carved the truth too deeply to deny. "He thinks this is about love, but it's not. It's about survival. My family can't keep it standing without new wealth. And Daniel's work is the ticket. His projects are worth more than he realizes. Once they're in my hands, there will be no limits." The world tilted beneath him. 3 years of memories: their long walks by the river, the way she cheered at his presentations, the way she said she believed in his vision, all of it replayed in his mind, like scenes from a film suddenly revealed to be staged. He pressed his palm to the wall, steadying himself. The weight of betrayal threatened to crush him, yet he stayed silent, forcing his breath to remain even. Then came the words that broke something inside him. "If he starts to suspect," Claire said hesitantly. "What then?" Emily's laugh followed, colder than the church's stone walls. "He won't. Daniel wants to believe too much. He's a dreamer, and dreamers are easy to guide. By the time he questions anything, everything will already belong to me." Daniel's reflection in the mirror caught his eye: a man in a sharp suit, polished and prepared to pledge his life to someone who had already planned to use him as a stepping stone. His heart pounded like a drumbeat, but he stayed rooted in place, unwilling to burst through the door. Anger surged, but so did clarity. The priest's voice faintly carried down the hallway, "It's time." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He straightened his tie with deliberate calm, his jaw tightening. In that moment, he understood something that would shape the rest of his life. This wasn't just about heartbreak or betrayal, it was about whether he would let deception define him. He breathed deeply, looking once more at his reflection. The man staring back wasn't broken. He wasn't defeated. He was someone who had been given knowledge, and knowledge was power. And while the world outside expected a fairy tale wedding, Daniel knew the story that was about to unfold would be remembered for something far greater than vows or rings. With every step he took toward the altar, he carried not only the weight of truth, but also the spark of something stronger: resolve. What Emily didn't realize was that she had awakened a side of Daniel that was unshakable. The guests rose as the music swelled, smiles lighting the room. They saw a groom walking toward his bride, but within him, Another story was beginning, one of courage, resilience, and a revelation that would turn whispers into thunder. And as Daniel reached the end of the aisle, he knew the moment would come when every single person in that church would see not just a groom, but a man ready to turn heartbreak into history. Daniel barely remembered the ceremony that day. The blur of music, the shifting faces in the pews, the glint of light on polished wood, all of it felt unreal. Like a dream he was walking through on borrowed steps. He kept his expression calm, even managed to smile when the cameras turned toward him. But inside, a storm raged louder than the church bells. Every word Emily spoke seemed coated with hidden meanings only he could hear. Every glance she cast at him, once a source of comfort, now burned like ice against his skin. He replayed the conversation he had overheard, every syllable pressing against his chest like an iron weight. Love, he realized, had blinded him. He had painted Emily as the answer to his prayers, the partner who had seen beyond his long hours and worn-out hands, who had chosen him not for what he had, but for who he was. But now the cracks in that image widened into canyons. She had never seen him. She had only seen the promise of power and security. As the reception carried on, Daniel remained present in body, but far away in spirit. Guests congratulated him. Toasts were raised, and laughter filled the hall, but he moved through it like a shadow. Each smile he returned felt like a mask. His closest friends chalked his quietness up to nerves. Only Daniel knew the truth. He was calculating. That night, when the last guest had left and Emily had disappeared into a conversation with her relatives, Daniel slipped into his office at home. He sat at his desk, staring at the project spread. Across it, blueprints of buildings designed to withstand storms, to bring light into communities that had been ignored for too long. These were more than designs. They were his legacy, his offering to a world that had once told him he would never rise above mediocrity. And now, the woman he had trusted most wanted to take it all. Daniel leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Memories surfaced like pages flipping through a book. Their first meeting, her smile across the crowded gala hall, the way she had leaned in, asking about his dreams, genuinely, or so he thought, interested. The evenings they spent walking through the city, her hand tucked into his, telling him how proud she was of his vision. He had believed every word, but in those memories, he now noticed details he had once ignored. How her questions always circled back to his company. How she seemed most alive when he spoke of contracts, investors, or new opportunities. He had mistaken attention for affection, and the realization tore at him. But where some men would have surrendered to bitterness, Daniel felt something else. Rising within him, determination. Pain had always been part of his journey. He had grown up watching his mother work double shifts to keep food on the table, had studied under street lamps when electricity was cut off, had pushed through rejection after rejection in the early days of his firm. Every obstacle had taught him one thing: pain could either break you or build you. And this betrayal, as sharp as it was, would be no different. Over the following days, Daniel observed Emily with new eyes. She carried herself with grace in public, her laughter ringing bright at dinners with investors, her compliments sliding easily into conversations with his partners. Yet Daniel noticed the subtle way she steered discussions toward ownership, contracts, and shares. She cloaked her intentions in charm, but now he could see the thread of ambition running beneath her every word. He began testing her. Small questions dropped casually over breakfast. Would you still love me if I walked away from all this success? Or do you think happiness is possible without wealth? Each time, her answers came too quickly, too polished. She never stumbled, but she never truly answered either. It was as though she were performing a role, one she had perfected long ago. One evening, as she admired the city skyline from their balcony, she said softly, "All this will be ours one day. Your buildings will stand as monuments, and we'll be the couple everyone envies." Daniel studied her face in the glow of the city lights. For a moment, he almost believed her sincerity again. Almost. But then she added, "And when the time comes, we'll make sure everything is secure in our name. That way, nothing can be taken from us. Our name." The choice of words wasn't lost on him. He realized he was standing on a knife's edge. Confront her too soon, and she would twist the truth. paint him as paranoid, wait too long, and she might succeed in stripping him of everything. He needed proof, something undeniable, something so strong that no denial could stand against it. So Daniel began to gather evidence. Quietly, methodically, he copied documents, saved emails, and recorded late-night conversations when Emily thought he was asleep. Each piece felt like a brick in the foundation of a plan he hadn't yet revealed. Even to himself, he didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. What he wanted was truth laid bare so no one could question it. The hardest part was pretending. Every morning, he greeted her with the same warmth he always had, kissed her cheek, held her hand in public. To anyone watching, they were a picture of love inside. Daniel wrestled with 1,000 unspoken words. He wanted to ask her why. He wanted to look her in the eye and demand the truth. But he held his silence, knowing the time wasn't right. And yet, in the quiet moments when she wasn't around, doubt gnawed at him. What if he had misheard? What if there was some explanation he hadn't considered? He wanted to believe the woman he loved was still in there somewhere, beneath the ambition and calculation. He wanted to believe that the years they had shared weren't built on lies. But then he would remember her laugh in that hallway, sharp, cold, nothing like the laugh that had once drawn him in. And the doubt would vanish. Daniel knew he couldn't carry this secret forever. The day would come when silence would no longer be strength, but surrender. Until then, he walked the fine line between appearances and truth, waiting, preparing. Because if there was one thing life had taught him, it was this: storms always reveal what foundations are built of. And when this storm broke, everyone would see exactly who Emily was and who Daniel had chosen to become. The nights grew longer for Daniel, not because the hours had changed, but because his mind refused to rest. Sleep became a stranger. His thoughts raced with plans, doubts, and flashes of memories that cut deeper with each replay. The image of Emily smiling at him across candlelit dinners now twisted into a mask he could no longer trust. Yet beneath the ache, something else had taken root: resolve. Daniel knew he couldn't live in the shadows of suspicion forever. Silence had protected him so far, but it wasn't enough. If Emily was truly everything she had revealed in that whispered conversation, then she wouldn't stop until she had taken his life's work and bent it to her will. And if he confronted her too early, he would be dismissed as paranoid, or worse, she might shift the story and play the victim. No, this required patience, strategy, and above all, proof. He began to design his plan the way he designed his buildings, carefully, with every detail considered. Daniel had learned long ago that a structure wasn't defined only by what you saw above ground. Its strength came from what lay hidden beneath the surface. And so it would be with this. The first step was gathering evidence. He started small, recording snippets of conversations on his phone whenever Emily drifted in to talk about contracts, property, or control. Sometimes she spoke in passing, cloaked in the language of partnership, our company, our assets, our empire. But Daniel had learned to listen closely. The subtleties painted a picture more telling than direct confession. Next, he confided in one person, Marcus Hayes, his mentor, and the man who had first given him a chance as an intern. Years ago, Marcus was retired now, living quietly with his wife in a cottage by the sea. But his mind remained as sharp as the day. He'd run one of the largest construction firms in the region. Daniel drove to see him one evening, carrying the weight of his secret like a stone in his chest. Marcus listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded over his cane. When Daniel finished, the old man leaned back, eyes narrowing in thought. "Son, trust is like glass. Once it's cracked, you can polish it, you can pretend it's whole, but the fracture will always be there. The question is not whether you love her, but whether the person you love truly exists. From what you've told me, I fear she doesn't." Daniel lowered his gaze, struggling against the sting of those words. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentler now. "Don't let anger guide you. If you want justice, make it undeniable. Truth has a way of standing taller than lies when it's shown in the right light. Collect what you need. When the moment comes, let her reveal herself to the world. That will be your strength." Those words carved themselves into Daniel's mind. He spent the following weeks weaving his plan, He reached out to his legal team discreetly, asking them to review documents under the pretense of routine audits. He asked his assistant to back up files, patents, and contracts to secure servers only he could access. Every blueprint, every innovation he had ever created, he guarded as though his very soul were etched into those lines. Meanwhile, Emily moved through their shared life with effortless grace, unaware of the storm building beneath the surface. She smiled at him over breakfasts, planned dinners with investors, and spoke of honeymoon destinations. To anyone looking in, they were the golden couple. To Daniel, every interaction was another rehearsal, another opportunity to measure her words, her tone, her intent. One night, Emily suggested they draw up a new joint account. For simplicity, Daniel agreed on the surface, but quietly documented the conversation. Another evening, she pressed him about transferring patents into both their names as a gesture of trust again. Daniel nodded calmly, even joked about it, but his phone recorded every word. Piece by piece, her ambition was etching itself into evidence. There were moments, late at night, when Daniel sat awake beside her sleeping form, wrestling with questions that tore at him. What if he was wrong? What if somewhere, beneath the calculation, there was still love? But then he would remember the cruelty in her laugh that day outside the chapel room, and the doubt would vanish. The closer the wedding anniversary celebration came, the more Daniel's plan crystallized. Guests would gather again, family and friends, journalists eager to cover the success story of the architect and his elegant wife. And that, Daniel decided, would be the moment, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in truth. He would let the world see Emily for who she truly was, and let the weight of her own words speak louder than his. But he needed one more piece, undeniable proof, something so striking that even Emily herself could not deny it. And so he crafted an idea, bold and dangerous. He would create a private dinner, a moment of false intimacy, where Emily would feel safe enough to reveal her true intentions without restraint. He would ask her questions, lead her gently, and record it all. On the chosen night, Daniel poured her a glass of wine, his voice light, his demeanor relaxed. They laughed together, shared stories of old trips, and for a fleeting moment, he almost forgot the pain. Then, carefully, he guided the conversation toward their future. "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" he asked softly. Emily's eyes sparkled, and her hand brushed his. "Of course, once everything is settled under our control. The possibilities are endless. Our control." Her words flowed easily, confidently, without fear. And Daniel, with a calm face and a racing heart, listened. He asked more questions, each one a doorway, and she walked through them willingly. When she finally leaned back in her chair and whispered about securing his company, before any unexpected troubles, Daniel knew he had what he needed. That night, as she drifted to sleep beside him, Daniel stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. The recording lay safely tucked away. The final piece of the puzzle. The man who had once been blind was now armed with truth. And as dawn approached, Daniel whispered to himself, "When the curtain rises, the world will know." The stage was set. The audience would be ready, and Emily Harrison, for the first time, would face a spotlight she could not control. The morning of the anniversary celebration arrived with a deceptive calm. The sky was painted in soft blues and golds, the kind of morning poets would have called perfect. Yet inside Daniel, the air was heavy, charged with tension he could almost taste. He stood at his bedroom mirror, straightening the cuffs of his suit, rehearsing the stillness in his expression. Today would not simply be a celebration. Today would be revelation. Guests began to arrive long before noon. Cars lined the driveway of the grand hall, doors swinging open to release men in tailored suits and women in flowing gowns. Reporters carried their cameras and notebooks, eager for photographs of the power couple whose names had become synonymous with elegance and influence. Friends and family spilled into the glittering foyer, their voices blending with the music of a live string quartet. To them, it was a night of champagne and speeches, a chance to toast love, success, and the future. None of them knew that beneath the polished veneer, truth waited like a storm at sea. Daniel greeted them all with steady composure. He shook hands, offered smiles, and thanked well-wishers for their support. If anyone noticed the steel in his eyes, they mistook it for pride. Only Daniel knew it was something else, an iron calm forged in betrayal, and sharpened by weeks of planning. Emily was radiant, as she always was. She floated from guest to guest, her laughter spilling like music across the room. She touched Daniel's arm now and then, leaning in as though they shared a secret only they could understand. To everyone watching, she was the image of devotion. But Daniel felt the weight of her words recorded in the device tucked safely in his jacket pocket. He carried her confession like a hidden flame, one that would soon burn through every illusion she had built. Dinner was served beneath chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. Plates of fine cuisine were placed before the guests, glasses filled with wine that shimmered ruby in the light. Toasts were made, friends praising Daniel's vision, family honoring Emily's grace, colleagues marveling at the partnership that seemed to promise endless horizons. Daniel listened, every word piercing him with irony. He raised his glass when prompted, smiled when expected, but his mind was already on what was to come. When the time arrived for him to speak, the room hushed. All eyes turned toward him, expecting words of gratitude, perhaps a romantic gesture for his wife, something to crown the evening with warmth. Daniel stood slowly, his hand resting on the back of his chair, and let the silence stretch until anticipation thickened the air. 2 years ago, he began, his voice calm, steady. I believed I had found not just success, but a partner who believed in me for who I am. I believed in love, in loyalty, in trust. Tonight, I want to share a different kind of truth, a truth I never expected to face. Murmurs stirred among the guests, cameras tilted forward. Emily's smile faltered, though only slightly. Daniel reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device. He placed it on the table, pressing a button. At first, there was only static. Then Emily's voice filled the hall, sharp and unmistakable. Daniel sees me as his everything. Once the ceremony is over, he'll hand over control without hesitation. After that, the future is ours to shape. Gasps rippled across the room. Guests shifted in their chairs, their eyes darting between the recording device and Emily's face. She sat frozen, her lips parted but no words escaping. The recording continued. He thinks this is about love, but it's not. It's about survival. His projects are worth more than he realizes. Once they're in my hands, there will be no limits. The air grew heavy. The strings of the quartet had gone silent. The bow of one violinist trembling in midair. Emily rose from her seat, her voice breaking through the shock. This is out of context, she insisted, her tone urgent. You're twisting this, Daniel. You don't understand. But Daniel's hand lifted gently, silencing her without raising his voice. He pressed another button. Her voice came again, softer this time, almost intimate. Once everything is settled under our control, the possibilities are endless. And when the time comes, we'll make sure everything is secure in our name. That way, nothing can be taken from us. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily's composure cracked, her face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain, to insist it was all for them, for their future together. But the words sounded hollow, fragile, against the strength of her own recorded intentions. Daniel looked out over the room, meeting the eyes of his guests. For months, I wrestled with doubt. I wanted to believe the person I loved was real. But tonight, I want everyone here to see the truth as it is, not as I hoped it to be. Betrayal doesn't always come with warning. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it looks like love. But deception, no matter how carefully woven, cannot last forever. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and whispers surged like waves. Some guests stared at Emily in disbelief. Others looked at Daniel with sympathy, admiration, even awe. Emily reached for him then, her voice pleading. Daniel, please, we can fix this. I made mistakes. But it doesn't have to end like this. But Daniel's gaze was steady, unshaken. It already has. With those words, he stepped back from the table, leaving a silence that no one dared to break. The celebration was no longer a toast to love, but a testament to truth. And though Daniel's heart was heavy with what he had lost, he felt a strange strength rising in its place. Tonight was not the end of his story, it was the beginning of something far greater. Because when the mask of betrayal falls, what remains is not just pain, but clarity, and clarity, Daniel knew, was the foundation of every lasting triumph. The room never truly recovered from the moment the recording ended. Conversations that once danced with laughter now buzzed with tension. Each word whispered behind raised glasses and cautious glances. Emily had retreated into silence, her hands shaking against the linen of the tablecloth, her charm slipping. Like a mask in the rain, cameras captured her stillness, her face frozen somewhere between disbelief and desperation. Daniel did not linger in the storm he had unleashed. He excused himself from the table with measured calm, stepping into the hallway lined with portraits of forgotten patrons. Away from the bright chandeliers and flashing lenses, he allowed himself a single, deep breath. His chest felt heavy, yet strangely unburdened. The truth was out now. It had been ripped from shadows and laid bare for the world to see. He knew. The headlines would arrive by morning. Architect exposes wife's deception. Society wedding turns into shocking revelation. Gossip would churn through every channel, speculation filling in the blanks where facts ended. But Daniel wasn't chasing scandal. He wasn't driven by the hunger for revenge. What he wanted, more than anything, was freedom from the lies, from the performance, from the weight of pretending. As the night unraveled behind him, Emily's family scrambled to contain the fallout. Whispers of financial instability, once only rumor, now erupted into open conversation. Investors who had placed faith in her family name pulled back with wary eyes. The Harrison legacy, so carefully polished, began to fracture in front of everyone. Emily herself attempted explanations, but her words scattered like leaves in the wind. Each denial was undercut by the sound of her own recorded voice, echoing in the minds of those who had heard it. Daniel, meanwhile, chose not to fight her with venom. In the days that followed, when the press hounded him for interviews, he spoke calmly, offering no ridicule or scorn. Sometimes, he said to one reporter, "People show you who they are only when they believe you're not watching. I don't hold hatred in my heart, but I refuse to let betrayal define me." Those words spread further than he expected. Social media filled with quotes from his interview. Strangers admiring his restraint. Young entrepreneurs called him an example of dignity in the face of adversity. His story, painful as it was, became a lesson others began to share, not of scandal, but of resilience. But in private, Daniel's nights were not easy. Silence weighed heavily in the home that once felt alive with conversation. He walked past rooms filled with memories, each one now colored by suspicion. He saw the balcony where Emily had once spoken of their future, the table where they had shared late-night meals, the shelves where her favorite books still rested. Betrayal is not just a wound, it is a ghost that lingers, reminding you of what once seemed unshakable. One evening, Marcus called him. The old mentor's voice carried a steady warmth. "You've done what few could. You face truth with grace. But don't mistake surviving for healing. Healing takes more than proving someone wrong. It takes deciding who you'll be after the storm." Daniel sat in silence, staring out at the city lights that blinked against the dark. Marcus was right. The public saw a man who had stood tall, but inside, Daniel felt the cracks. He realized that this was the next battle, not with Emily, not with her family, but within himself. So he began again. Slowly, he returned to his work, pouring himself into designs that spoke of renewal, resilience, and light breaking through darkness. He visited communities where his projects were being built, walking the dusty roads, speaking to families who would one day live in the homes he created. Their gratitude reminded him why he had started in the first place, not for wealth or prestige, but for impact. Each blueprint became a reflection of his own journey, proof that broken things could still give rise to something beautiful. The world watched as Daniel transformed his pain into purpose. Invitations poured in for him to speak at universities, conferences, and leadership forums. People wanted to hear not just about his architectural genius, but about his courage to stand in truth. At first, he hesitated. Speaking about his private life felt like reopening a wound. But when he finally stood before a crowd, he discovered something unexpected. He wasn't telling a story of loss, he was telling a story of strength. He spoke of trust, of vigilance, of the importance of holding onto your vision even when others try to steal it. He reminded his listeners that betrayal is not the end of a story, but often the beginning of one more powerful than you could have imagined. And as he spoke, he saw eyes light up in the audience, people finding their own reflections in his journey. Meanwhile, Emily faded from the spotlight. The family name that once carried weight grew quiet, whispers of debts and broken alliances chasing them into obscurity. For all her careful planning, she had overlooked one truth: deceit can build walls, but it cannot build foundations. And without a foundation, even the grandest facades will fall. Daniel never gloated, never spoke her name in bitterness. He had no need. His revenge had not been humiliation, it had been growth. His life had expanded, his influence deepened, and his story had touched hearts far beyond what he had imagined. That was victory enough. And yet, even with all of his success, Daniel remained humble. He often told people, strength isn't about never being hurt. Strength is about what you build after the hurt. He lived by those words, carrying them like a compass pointing him forward. But late at night, when the city had gone quiet and the noise of applause faded, Daniel would stand by the same window where he had once whispered his plans. The skyline stretched before him, lights flickering like constellations. He knew his journey wasn't finished. The world saw him as triumphant, but he understood something deeper. Healing is not a single moment. It is a path you walk every day, with courage, patience, and faith. And as he watched the horizon, Daniel promised himself one thing: the past would never hold him hostage again. Whatever came next, he would meet it not with fear, but with the unshakable certainty that truth, no matter how painful, always leads to freedom. The night sky above the city shimmered like a blanket of distant fires. But Daniel Carter wasn't looking at the stars. He stood on the balcony of his apartment, hands resting on the railing, eyes fixed on the lights below. Each one represented a story, a dream, a life moving forward. For the first time in months, he felt that those lights no longer mocked his pain. They invited him to step into something new. The storm had passed. The whispers of scandal had faded into the background of yesterday's news. Emily's name had slowly disappeared from headlines, her once celebrated image dimming into obscurity. There were no more recordings to play, no more gasps in glittering halls. What remained was Daniel, standing not as a man betrayed, but as a man reborn. And yet, he knew the journey wasn't about forgetting. The memory of that day in the chapel, the cruel edge of laughter, the weight of words that had nearly shattered him, those were carved into him forever. But instead of scars, he chose to see them as reminders, proof that even in the darkest moments, he had not broken. He had bent, yes, but bending had taught him resilience. His company thrived more than ever. Clients admired not just his vision, but the integrity with which he lived. Contracts multiplied, but so did opportunities beyond business. Universities invited him to mentor young architects. Nonprofit organizations asked him to design spaces for struggling communities. Everywhere he went, people wanted to hear not only about buildings, but about the man who had turned betrayal into strength. He found himself standing before crowds of hundreds, sometimes thousands. On one stage, in front of a sea of young graduates, Daniel paused after his speech, watching their faces. He saw himself reflected in their eager eyes, the boy who once studied under street lamps, the man who believed love would protect him, the soul who had stumbled but refused to stay down. You will all face storms, he told them, his voice steady, calm. Some will be small, others will nearly break you. People may betray you, life may disappoint you, and your dreams may seem fragile. But here's what I've learned: storms do not come to destroy you. They come to show you what you're made of. And when you stand tall again, you'll realize you were stronger than you ever imagined. The applause rose like thunder, but it wasn't the noise that moved him. It was the quiet tears in the front row, the nods of people who carried their own hidden wounds. That was when Daniel understood. His story was no longer his alone. It belonged to anyone who had ever been broken, anyone who had ever thought they couldn't rise again. In his personal life, healing took slower steps. Trust, once shattered, didn't rebuild overnight. There were moments he still woke in the quiet hours, heart pounding from dreams that replayed old conversations. But he learned to face them, to breathe through them, to remind himself that the present was no longer chained to the past. One evening, while attending a charity gala event much like the one where he had first met Emily, Daniel found himself speaking with a woman named Claire Thompson. She was nothing like Emily. Claire was quiet where Emily had been dazzling, thoughtful where Emily had been sharp. She didn't ask about his wealth or his projects. Instead, she asked about the communities he designed for, the children who would one day grow up in the homes he built. They spoke for hours, long after the music had softened and the hall had begun to empty. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: ease. There was no performance, no need to guard his words, just conversation, just honesty. He didn't know what it would become, and for the first time, he didn't rush to define it. He simply allowed himself to feel the quiet comfort of being understood. Months passed, and Daniel grew into his new rhythm: work, mentorship, speaking engagements, moments of connection with new friends. Life was not perfect, but it was whole. He discovered that wholeness wasn't about never being hurt. It was about learning how to live fully despite the hurt. Looking back, he realized his greatest victory wasn't exposing Emily. It wasn't the applause or the headlines. His greatest victory was choosing not to let betrayal harden him. He had chosen compassion over bitterness, truth over vengeance, growth over destruction. One night, as he walked through one of his finished housing projects, a community of modest but beautiful homes designed for families who had once lived in shelters, he saw children playing in the street, their laughter echoing into the evening air. Mothers stood on porches, neighbors shared conversations across fences, and the glow of warm lights filled every window. Daniel paused, his chest tightening with something deeper than pride. This, he realized, was his true legacy, not the betrayal he had endured, not the scandal that had once defined him, but the lives touched by what he had built. And in that moment, he whispered to himself, "This is what rising looks like." The story that had begun with heartbreak ended with hope. Daniel Carter was no longer just a man who had been betrayed at the altar of trust. He was a man who had discovered the unshakable truth that even in the face of loss, you can rise, rebuild, and become something greater than the world ever expected. And as he walked away from the laughter of children and into the promise of tomorrow, he carried with him the lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. The past may shape you, but it does not define you. What defines you is the courage to stand tall, even when everything tries to bring you down.